Hi, welcome to MamaFuel. My name is Anne Ferguson. I am your host, and I'm thrilled to bring you this podcast that was created to fuel every mama's heart, soul, mind, and body, and hopefully spark a dream or two along the way. My mission is to change the way that we mamas treat ourselves and each other so that we feel better, live happier lives, and change the world one happier family at a time. In the MamaFuel podcast, I'm sharing real, raw, and often funny conversations with amazing mamas from around the world to remind you that you're not alone and that you're doing amazingly on this wild journey of being a gorgeous woman shepherding small humans as they make their way on our beautiful planet. You are amazing, and I cannot wait to share this conversation with you. Let's get started. Well, hello there, and welcome to what is a very exciting episode for me. Would you believe that this is already episode 50 of MamaFuel? If you are new to MamaFuel, then I am so thrilled that you're here, and I can't wait for you to binge listen to the first 50 episodes or just cherry pick the ones that seem the most interesting to you. I would love to hear what you think of this episode and any of the other ones, and if you wanted to rate and leave a review in Apple Podcasts, it would be so incredible and such an amazing gift for me. One, because we've crossed the 1-year threshold of the podcast, and two, because this 50, this half of 100, is hugely significant to me. I love recording and having conversations with amazing mamas for this podcast. And today's episode is a little bit unusual because I asked my beautiful friend Noomi Natan to interview me, because I've been reminded recently in reading Dr. Tara Trent's The Awakened Woman about the importance of storytelling, of each woman telling her story and relating her experience and placing a stake in the ground as to where she has been, where she is, and where she wants to go. And that's part of what happened during the conversation that Noomi and I just recorded, and I can't wait to share with you. If you are listening to this podcast at the time that it is released, which is mid-June, you will have the opportunity to join me for the self-love immersion that is starting today, the 17th of June. If you're listening today or in the 5 days afterwards, there is still time to join me for 5 days of delicious self-love. You can go to my website, mamafuel.me/self-love immersion, and you will find everything that you need to know there. I would love for you to join us because taking care of yourself is the number one most important thing you can do for your own mental well-being, physical well-being, and for your family's well-being. Okay, without any further ado, let's get straight into my interview with Noomi Natan.
Welcome to MamaFuel. I am Noomi Natan, and I'm your host today because this is an extra special episode. This is episode 50 of MamaFuel. And so we have turned the tables because instead of having Anne interview a fabulous mama, I am interviewing Anne. I am so thrilled that you trusted me to be the person that gets to interview you and have a conversation about what it's like for you to be a mama. And I'm filled with questions and things that I can't wait to talk to you about. So I know that you have one special question that you ask in the beginning to get everyone started. And so I want to know, tell us, what does life look like at the moment for you?
Well, before I get to that, I want to say thank you. Thank you for agreeing to do this. It's super fun and not a little bit nerve-wracking to be on the other end of the questions. It's a lot of fun. So thank you for your confidence and your willingness to step into this role, because I know you've just launched a podcast and it's just all new and fun. So what my life looks like right now. My life has a tendency to go about a bajillion miles an hour. I am reading Kate Northrup's book, Do Less. I'm going, and not quite yet integrating the learnings from that. So I have my 2 girls, Carolina, who listeners will have heard on a previous podcast talking about what it's like to be 11 and be dyslexic and be in school and all of those things. And she's about to turn 12, and Amelia, who's about to turn 10. A very gorgeous dog who's about to turn 5 as we're on birthdays. My husband, who travels a lot and is away today, he's away probably 60 to 70% of the time. So it's not the worst it's ever been. As far as his absence, there was a long time in our family where I used to say that he would just come home and visit, because that was what it was. He'd come home for 48 hours and then he'd leave again, or 24 hours. It's better now, but he is still incredibly supportive, very present, but also not physically here a lot. We live in Geneva, which we've been residents of for 12 years, which is exciting. And we might be looking at getting our Swiss citizenship. So that's a big thing.
Yeah, because
I can see the application on my desk right now. So that's a big deal. And what else? At time of recording, we are getting ready to go to Canada for 6 weeks for the second year in a row. And I'm feeling that end of school year, lots going on. And of course, I've decided to take my Mama's mini breaks, which is a mini retreat that I've offered here in Geneva in my home and in a different studio. I've decided to take those on the road all across Switzerland this year and all across North America as I travel, because, you know, why keep things simple and cool when you can have fun and meet lots of people and run events? So that's going to kick off, hopefully announcing that today. So there's a lot. There's a lot. I feel great. I was just upstairs in the kitchen going, I love my life. Because I was getting ready for this interview and just thinking about the opportunity to live in this incredibly safe, beautiful place in this home that we own, and with a husband that I adore and who adores me, and kids who are the same. Like I'm very, very, very conscious of how lucky we are, and of how much privilege there is in being that lucky, and how much bandwidth that gives me to create space and support other people who maybe aren't feeling so lucky.
And, you know, you were talking about living in Geneva, and I'm thinking, wow, yay for the internet, because here I am in Oxford and I'm interviewing you, and you're not even from Geneva, right? And your husband isn't either. I'm just thinking you guys are really citizens of the world, which also feels like that's part of the picture of what life is like for you. So do you want to tell people where each of you are from and how many languages you speak at home? Because it's quite a few.
Yeah, because I guess that's a really good question, because most people probably don't know that. So I'm going to take a big step back. My father was Canadian, Anglophone Canadian, but always loved French, and was in Germany doing his military service in exchange for the army paying for his university. And he met my mom, who's French. They married, moved to the UK, where I was conceived.
So they met in Germany?
They met in Germany, yeah. He was on a Canadian Army base back in the late 60s, early 70s, when Canadians still had army bases in Germany, which they no longer do. And they moved to Canada while my mom was pregnant with me. I was born in Canada, but raised very consciously by my parents in French, because we were in an English environment, and clearly my English took care of itself. And the French was something that I fought a lot. I hated it as a kid. My parents were really strict about not wanting any other languages in the house. Even when we'd have friends over who didn't speak the language or who kind of struggled, they were like, no, this is our family's language and this is what we speak, and that's the end. And actually, I understand in a way why that was the approach. And I really appreciated it later in life when I wasn't kind of sort of speaking French, or not at all, like most Canadians who have to take French classes if they're in the Anglophone parts of Canada, which is the bulk of the country. But they don't actually speak a word of French. Or if they do, they butcher it so horrifically that it's not even worth it. My French language is definitely part of what got me my first job in communications. It's what got me my postgrad certificate spot in PR. It's part of what got me the job I got in London later. Like, it's having the second language was huge. And I had always wanted to speak Spanish. From a really young child, I used to leaf through the Patagonia catalogs. And it wasn't until I'm ashamed to say this, it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I realized that Patagonia was a place and not just a brand of really cool outdoor hiking gear. And so I used to leaf through these catalogs and dream of going to this place that I didn't even know was a Spanish-speaking place, and dream of speaking Spanish and dream of all of this. And then I met in London this Argentine guy who'd lived in Spain for 20 years, so is now a Spanish citizen. And yeah, eventually got married, and our kids are Spanish, French, and Canadian nationals. We speak Spanish and English and French at home, often all at the same time. English has taken a bit of an upper hand, which, like my parents before me, I find frustrating, but have decided that I don't want a constant battle in my house around communication. I'd rather actually just have our kids tell us stuff. And if it comes out in English, then it comes out in English. And it does more with my husband because he's less demanding about the language. I'm the one who's like, how do you say that in Spanish? How do you, and it's annoying, and I know it's annoying. And so I modulate how much I insist that they make the effort, because I don't want them to get to adulthood and be able to understand it, but not really speak it. So we're in this constant dance of ensuring that communication flows freely, giving them the full right of their expression, which obviously happens. I mean, even for me today, I did all my studies after primary school in English, and it's much easier for me to communicate in English, even more so in writing than it is in the spoken word. In the spoken word, I'm okay, but you lose part of your personality, right? If you don't have the quick wit, if you don't have the different expressions. I imagine that it must be the same with you, maybe with Danish and English. Like, do you have one language that leads over the other?
Well, I just noticed that we could do a whole episode just talking about raising trilingual children. And of course, I'm doing the same. And the challenges of that, and being a trilingual family. And you guys at least understand all of each other's languages. We don't fully do that here in my house.
Ish. I speak, so I learned Spanish when I was pregnant with Carolina. I went to Barcelona, and for the first time in my life since I was 15 years old, I wasn't working. And my husband very generously said, look, I'll just sign you up to a language school. And I thought it would be like Berlitz or something. No, he signed me up to a university executive management school, where I went and learned high-level Spanish with people who were, MBA grads and like people who really needed it to really, really use it. So I spent 7 very intense weeks busting my backside desperately to make the most of this time, until I was just so pregnant I couldn't stand it anymore. So I speak Spanish much better than I write it, but I speak it pretty fluently. Like, it's not very sophisticated, but it's fluent. My husband, on the other hand, has many talents. Learning French is not one of them. Mm-hmm. So we've been here for 12 years, and because I'm fluent, and because I was the one who was here, I do all the things. So I book the appointments and take the dry cleaning in and do like the stuff, because he physically wasn't here. And because he has this story that he tells where he went into a big store here where you get like housewares, like it would be like a B&Q in the UK or Home Depot in North America. And he went in and he wanted salt for our water softener. And in salt in French is sel, and in Spanish is sal. But sal in French, which is a little different from sal in Spanish is salt. Sal is dirty in French. Oh. So he went in and asked for dirty, and he kept saying, but I want dirty. And they were like, what? And so they took him to the cleaning products section, and he was like, no, I don't want the cleaning products. My house, it's dirty. In the machine, dirty. And they were like, you want something to clean your dishwasher? And he was like, no. And he was getting so frustrated. And then he kept saying, sal. And he was like mimicking shaking salt onto his food and eating it. And they were like, you want to eat dirt? And he finally, right. And it just lasted 40 minutes of this. And finally the person got really angry and was a bit rude to him, because he just kept saying the same thing over and over and over and over again. And it was a vowel difference, like he was trying and it was great, but it's just an illustration, no longer current, because he can do better than that now, but of these ridiculous situations that he finds himself in, because language it's just hard. He's a scientist, he's a magician, he's a philosopher, he's a lot of things. He's not a linguist.
Well, it's fascinating, I think, languages and how we communicate and the subtleties and the emotions we can express differently in languages. And maybe this is a good way then to lead us instead of into trilingual child raising, though that's I'd love to do that episode another time. Maybe you can tell us how you became a mother, because also, you were raised in one language and in one country, and motherhood, I think if I remember correctly, several different countries already for you. So do you want to tell us, what was it like for you to become a mama?
Whew. Okay. Big step back, not as far as when I was conceived, but close. When I was 13, my parents moved us back to Germany, where my mom got a job working on, she worked for National Defense. She was a translator in Kingston, where I grew up. There weren't a lot of jobs at the time for a translator. That was pretty much the only thing going. And so she had been there for a long, long, long time, but wanted to do something different and wanted us to connect to other parts of our European culture. And so moving to Germany was great. And I was able to go to school for a year in Strasbourg in France. So my dad would drive me across the border every day. It was about an hour on the Autobahn in his big car that he'd taken the train to Sweden to pick up his Saab that he dreamt of. And he drove down, on the speed limit free Autobahn, like a wild thing, happy as anything. And just before I was about to start school, stay with me, this relates to my first birth experience. When I was about to become a student at this international school that I was excited and terrified to join, I felt really bad pains in my stomach. And long story short, I had a massive, massive, massive cyst in my stomach at the age of 13. I looked like I was about 5 months pregnant. And I went to see a male gynecologist with my father at the emergency room at the military hospital, where we were covered, right? We weren't part of the German system. We were very much covered by Canadian health plans and so on. And so with my father waiting in the office and this male gynecologist doing his thing, as I was 13, and my mom was working, right? My dad was the one who had taken a year off. He said that basically there was probably a large tumor and that it was highly possible that it was cancerous and that they were going to have to remove it immediately. So instead of going to school the first week of September, I had surgery, which saved my life. There are no two ways about it. It saved my life. I'm not very confident that the gynecologist was maybe used to taking massive cysts and half of a reproductive system out of a 13-year-old.
I imagine not if it's a military gynecologist.
Right? I mean, to be fair, military gynecologists have a lot of babies to deliver. Military families have a lot of kids. There are a lot of them. Their families, and they have a lot of kids. So I'm fairly confident that his experience with the birth process must have been rigorous and deep. I'm not so sure that removing a teratoma and an aqueous cyst that surrounded it from a 13-year-old was part of his everyday experience. So I was on a ward with mothers, very few who had delivered that September. It was pretty empty. My nurses were male, some of whom were extremely funny, none of whom had ever had gynecological surgery for reasons you'll understand. And they were all soldiers. And I had this surgery. All I remember when the doctor told me that I was having this, I told my dad that I was going to have this operation. There was a 60 to 70% chance that it was cancerous. All I remember, I had my head down and I just remember his glasses coming down. He never took them off. And these huge tears. My dad was not a crier. These massive tears coming. And I don't remember anything after that. I don't remember the rest of the conversation. I don't remember the week getting ready for the surgery. I don't remember anything. I just remember I was going to miss the beginning of school and I might have cancer. And I fortunately they came in and told me that the tumor was benign. I was alone. They came in and said, we have news. The tumor is benign.
Alone getting that news at 13?
I was like, is that bad? Because I thought that meant that I had cancer.
Yeah.
And only later was I did I have the nerve enough to ask, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And my parents were in and out, and my aunt and uncle came to visit from Strasbourg, from the next town. I had people coming in and out, but obviously there were visiting hours and they couldn't be there all the time. And I was in my room by myself. And I remember the closest thing to psychological support was this male nurse came in. Can't remember what his name was. And I had a riding magazine. I love horses. And at the time I was that girl who just wanted a horse. I begged and begged and begged constantly, had huge horse posters in my room and got the magazines and went to camp and did all the things. And I remember asking his guy, because I couldn't, when they did the surgery at the time, they cut me from my navel to my pubic bone. So I have this huge scar that's about an inch wide now, but you can imagine on a 13-year-old who's still finishing growing. I mean, it was a pretty violent operation. I couldn't walk. I couldn't sneeze. I couldn't cough. I couldn't move my legs. unless I had help. It was so painful because they had just cut straight through my stomach muscles. So I had asked this guy, I'd rung for a nurse and he had come and he'd stood by the door and leaned against the door frame. And I said, would you be able to just get me the horse magazine? It's in my locker, like my green military locker at the end of the thing on the other side of the room. And he looked at me and said, what's the matter with you? You got piano tied to your ass? And I looked at him and I was like, and I kind of started, he was funny and sweet, but like that was therapy. That was it. That was all the psychological support I got. So fine. I have the surgery. They saved my life. I don't have cancer. I go back to school. I learn how to walk again, blah, blah, blah. I miss out on sports for that whole year, which sucks because they're doing like uneven bars and gymnastics and like not running, which I hate, like all the cool stuff that my school didn't have. And life continues. The only thing that I ever think about is, will I be able to have babies? Because half of my reproductive system is gone. Well, a third of it. The uterus was fine. And so I had my fertility checked, and many years later, one thing that actually I wasn't planning on talking about, and that anyone who knows me and is listening will be surprised to hear, is that when I was living in London, I became pregnant and I chose not to have that baby. And that's not a part of my story that I was at all planning on telling, but I think it's really important in light of what's going on in the US right now around abortion and reproductive rights with women. I chose when I was 31 years old to not have a baby with a man whose response to me when I said to him, guess what, we're pregnant, was, oh my God, what am I going to tell my parents? For lots of reasons, he was not the right person to raise a family with. And I was in a lot of debt at that point, and I wasn't prepared to go home to Canada feeling like I had failed this great adventure of moving to the UK and, trying something exciting. I wasn't prepared to go home with all that debt. I wasn't prepared to bring a child into the world that I really couldn't support. And so I had an abortion and had a lot of feelings of, I might not ever have another kid. Like this might be the fluke that I got pregnant and it's never going to happen again. Fortunately, that was not the case. Fortunately, not long thereafter, I met my husband and we decided to try for family, because at that point I was 32. We'd met a few years before, had this huge spark. Nothing had happened because he was my client. And as a good little Canadian, I compartmentalized things. Unlike my colleagues in the UK, we're happy to sort of jump in the sack with just about anybody, colleagues, clients. There didn't seem to be much discernment on, having a good time. And so we decided that we had wasted enough time and that if we were going to have a family, we might as well try. And I was like, listen, I don't know. It happened once, but I don't know if it'll ever happen again. Well, Carolina was clearly waiting for us. I was about to go traveling around the world. And instead of traveling around the world, I moved to Barcelona to have a baby. And it was going to be a natural birth, and it was going to be like I was doing yoga, and it was going to be like I was going to be on a birthing ball, and I was going to be walking in the halls, and maybe the doctor could have a birthing chair so that I could sit upright to birth, and all these things, and it was going to be great. And I was doing all the things to be this like uber natural super mama, and wasn't able to choose my gynecologist because they would only take you if they had space to deliver at the time that you were expected to deliver. And because I had come to them when I was 2 months pregnant, which was apparently way too late, and I was due in the summer, nobody wanted to take me on. So I found one person, my husband found one woman who was willing to take me on. We managed to work it around our holidays, but she wasn't very warm. And I didn't have any idea about I didn't realize how terrified I was of having a similar experience to the gynecological surgery where I wouldn't be able to walk, wouldn't be able to sneeze, wouldn't be able to cough, wouldn't be able to talk almost, because you use stomach muscles to do that stuff, right? So Carolina was born at 42 and a half weeks, which is very late. And they induced me, and I was strapped to a table. I was terrified. Strapped to a table in the delivery prep room, I guess. I don't know. I was in a basement. There were no windows. I don't speak Catalan. I spoke Spanish, but nobody there was speaking Spanish to me. I was with my husband. I had no idea what time it was. The contractions were terrible. And she hadn't dropped. So she wasn't going anywhere. And at about 4:00, they said to me, we're going to have to take her out. We're going to have to do an emergency C. And I was like, shit. And they said, we're going to put in the epidural. And I was like, is there anything we should know? And I was like, well, yeah, I have a really twisty spine. I have scoliosis, and it twists in this direction and it twists in that direction. And so the anesthetist came in and he palpitated my spine. He went, wow, well, this is a challenge, isn't it? And I thought, oh my God, now I might be paralyzed. I'm fairly anxious as a being, have been my whole life, but this, like, my feeling betrayed by my body when I was 13, that I suddenly, like, I might die. And then again, here I am. Oh my God, my twisty spine might mean that if he does something wrong, I'll be paralyzed. And then, oh my God, my body won't release my child. And all of this fear that had obviously been accumulating for 20 years, when she was born, almost to the day, 20 years after I had my surgery. I was 13 when I had my surgery, and I was 33 when she was born. So literally it was probably, I'm going to say, about 13 days between the day of my surgery and the day of her birth. And he didn't paralyze me, which is great. I'm grateful for that. And they did the surgery. And in the surgery room, they had me spread my arms open like I was on the cross, and they strapped my arms down, which was barbaric and unnecessary, and put the curtain up and started taking her out. And the first thing the surgeon said was, oof, this placenta is very calcified. It's a good thing we got her out. And what came out was this perfect little being with these incredibly wise, immense eyes.
But you were conscious? You were awake when they were taking?
Yeah. But her thighs were like papery. And so she didn't have like the chubby baby thighs and then like the calves. She just had like straight legs. They weren't skeletal, but they weren't like you see in all the baby ads. And only later did I realize I'd never seen a newborn before, ever. Like, I'd wanted a baby my whole life. I knew I was going to have girls. I wanted 4 kids. I knew I'd at least have 2 girls. Boys were just not part of the plan. I don't know. I was never going to have boys. 4 kids. And when they finally finished cleaning me up, and they all left. And they allowed my husband to come in holding my baby, who was wearing a hat, completely swaddled in clothing. They had cleaned her. They had put perfume on her. And he brought her to me and was able to pull my gown down and to put her on my chest. But it was only her cheek that was touching me. Like, there was no skin to skin contact. There was nobody there. There was nothing, no emotional support whatsoever. And I was like, ow, did you just pinch me? And he said, no. And I looked down and it was her. She was like, she knew what she was all about. She was like, yeah, I want the milk. And of course it didn't come, right? Because when you've had a C-section, your body hasn't received the message that there's no more baby inside, that it has to start making the milk. And I went into shock. So I started shaking, and I literally, my teeth were like smashing against each other, and I couldn't, they were like, stop shaking. I was like, I can't stop shaking. My heart rate went bananas, and I was so cold. They started piling blankets on top of me, and they could see my vitals. Like, I was going into real shock. And it's only years later, like probably in the last couple of years, that I now understand that at the time they were like, oh, it's just your hormones. You've just had a hormone shock. Your hormone levels are dropping. And they took Carolina away from me. They took me up in a lift. They wouldn't let her ride up in the same lift. There was room for my gurney and my husband and the people and my daughter. There was room. And they put her in I'm obviously still upset about it. They put her in a separate lift. They took her to the baby observation room, or wherever they keep the little newborns. I have no idea, because I never went there. And they didn't give her back to me for like 4 hours until I'd stabilized. So on the one hand, I get it, because, you know, I was not convulsing, but almost. I couldn't speak. And I thought and I was literally falling into a dark vortex of dying. Like, I was dying in my head. And eventually they were able to stabilize me. I don't know how or what. And I then fell into this really horrific, terrifying depression, because nothing had gone how I wanted it to go. Bit of a control freak. And it was nothing like what I had dreamed. And I had failed my daughter. I hadn't even been able to deliver a baby properly, in air quotes. And I had no milk. So I kind of attached my worth as a mother to vaginal delivery which I now realize is totally illogical and really unkind to me, but that's where I was at the time. And then my milk didn't come in for 3 days. And I just thought, this is the one thing that is going to work. Damn it, it's going to work. And Carolina, bless her, was doing her job. Like, she was going for it. But there was nothing. And she was losing weight and losing weight and losing weight. And she didn't have massive amounts of weight to lose. Like, she wasn't over 3 kilos. I can't even tell you how much she weighed. I want to say she weighed 3 kilos, 200, but I don't even know if she did. I think she was under 3 kilos, like 2.85 kilos or something. Not huge for a more than full-term baby, but super long, right? And I remember still the day that they came in with these little brown glass bottles with formula in them. And they gave her formula. And I remember sitting in that bed and just sobbing because I couldn't even give my baby milk. I couldn't even hold her properly. I didn't even know. I remember I had like 7 pillows around me when I was trying to nurse her, to just try to get her in the right position, whatever I thought that was, to maybe that was the problem. Maybe, like, I was desperate to find whatever would make a difference. And I remember getting up at one point to have a shower and realizing that I could walk. Like, this was a walk in the park. I could get up and walk. I could go to the shower. I could get in the shower. I could pee. I could brush my teeth standing up. Like, I could do stuff. But I remember going to the shower and coming out and standing like with my back against the wall and looking at my husband cooing over our baby. Like, they had bonded. Oh my God. He's the one who cleaned her. He's the one who dressed her. He's the one who cleaned her eyes and her ears and her mouth. Like, he got all the things. He got to do all the things while I was strapped with my arms out to a table. And they refused to bring her in until I was closed up because she wasn't sterile. And I was like, she just came out of my body. Like, how could she not be sterile? Hello, women do this all over the world. Like, what are you talking about? The clothes you just wrapped her in are not sterile. And I remember sliding down the wall onto the floor, and I was actually sure that there was no floor. Like, there literally was no floor. I was going to be swallowed by this hole. And I had an American woman coming in, and she was a midwife. She's like, I don't know what's going on. Like, I think maybe just your hormones are acting up, and you'll be fine in a couple days. And no psychologist came to see me ever. No local person ever said, you know what, I can tell that you're struggling. No smile of sympathy. They came and they would take her away in the middle of the night to force me to sleep. Take a baby away from an anxious mother to help her sleep. I got to tell you, it's not going to help her sleep. It didn't help me sleep. I just lay there terrified. What were they doing? And they would do things like they had to do the test where they prick the baby's heel to get blood for some test. They did that in the middle of the night. So we ended up getting home eventually with a baby who was jet lagged. Like, she would never go to sleep before 11:30 or 12 at night. She would only go to sleep on my breast when they finally started working. God help her. They were spraying all over her head. The milk finally came, and then it was like catching up for all the lost time. And you know, so being able to transition from like the hole in the floor, to actually being human and feeling like I might not die, took my friend Mary coming in to see me with her husband. And the two husbands were cooing over Carolina, and she was fine. She'd had milk. And Mary said, let's go outside. And I was like, I can't do that. She said, come on, let's go. And I think we might have walked to out the hospital into these, beautiful gardens in this searing heat of August. And I'd been in this air-conditioned place. Windows won't open. They won't let the windows open in case patients try to jump, and I don't know what else. Probably for sterility reasons. And she sat there with me, and I explained to her how I was feeling, and that I was pretty sure I was losing my mind, and that I would be completely incapable of caring for my child. And my husband was about to leave and go traveling for a week, and I didn't know what to do. And it came out in torrents. And she said, I remember when my dad died, feeling how you feel. And what helped me the most was when I realized that it was like the ocean, and that those waves of utter despair would just crash over me. And I was so sure I was drowning. And then they would bring me back to shore. And then later on, another one would crash over me. And I learned that if I didn't fight it, I would get back to shore more easily. And I swear to God, Mary, and that conversation saved my life. We're not in touch anymore, but I wish we were, because So we went home, and I struggled with panic attacks. I had lots of my two scars meeting in it. I have this, my husband joked, he was like, look, there's an arrow. It's telling me where to go. It wouldn't heal. So I had a really bad infection. So I had to go back to the hospital every single day. So not only did I have this place of trauma, but I had to go back and they had to like shove a syringe 3 inches along my scar and pull out the infection. I mean, it was awful. And I took medication that meant that I felt sick because I have really high sensitivity. My gut is all flavors of not healthy. And so had, this gut thing happening, this infection thing, didn't want to eat. So my milk wasn't great. My daughter wasn't, it was a nightmare. So that was my first delivery and it took a long time to get over. And then when I came to Geneva, I had Amelia and spoke all of those things to the head of the gynecological unit who we paid for me to be seen by him because we were like, I'm not doing this again. Saw midwives before, saw a psychologist before, saw a psychologist after, had all the support, great midwife, chose my delivery date, knew it was a C-section, knew I could walk. And it really closed the loop on that experience. But it's definitely part of why I do what I do, because I had no lived experience of what it was like to have mental illness at all. And PTSD slammed me hard. And then the increased anxiety and occasional bouts of postnatal depression. I mean, postnatal depression isn't occasional. It was postnatal depression for about, I would say, a good year. And there was a flicker of it after Amelia was born, and it hasn't come back since.
But it's one of the things you've started talking about a lot recently, this the mental health of particularly mamas. And I think, this expectation setup that we have, I definitely also was slammed with my own expectations of how it was meant to be. And then the reality of what happened. I didn't have that kind of birth story. I had a good birth story, but so many mismatch. And you've clearly had, it wasn't just the birth, it's been going on. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's made you open up? And even today you've shared things that you didn't know you were going to share. What's made you decide to both create MamaFuel, but also talk about mama's mental health?
I created MamaFuel under a different name. It was called the Centered Mama Project initially a few years ago because I had another period of not being well in my mind. And it happened when I was pushing my body, and it got to its limit and I wasn't listening. I wasn't paying attention. And so I had an anaphylactic reaction to some food that I'd eaten. And that anaphylactic reaction had me in ICU, and they were about to intubate me, and they said, there's nothing more we can do. We just need to see what your body does. And so again, I was like, shit, I'm going to die. I'm alone. My husband's in Texas for work, and my kids are 4 and 6. And the only person that I could think to call to look after my kids overnight was my cleaner, because I didn't want to bother anybody. Mm-hmm. And what followed was a good year of terror, because an allergy specialist had told me that I was likely allergic to all or some of the things I'd eaten. So I lost a load of weight because I would only eat sort of boiled carrots and rice and grilled chicken, all of which I'd only make myself. So I'd never, like, getting on a plane and eating food from anybody else was like, what if this happens on the plane? What if? And I became very isolated, and I'm a super social person, but I spent a lot of time at home, scared to eat, scared to go anywhere, scared to be far from a hospital. I had EpiPens. I had backups for my EpiPens. I had panic attacks when I went places, ended up going to the hospital because I was having panic attacks. Sure, I was dying, and they were like, no, you just had a panic attack, go home. But I'd used an EpiPen because my heart rate was like, I had done the things that my doctor had told me to do, right? But she didn't appreciate the level of anxiety that I was feeling, and she just fed it. And I didn't get any psychological support then either, because I could deal, right? I'm fine. I can handle it. And it was only later that I went to see a psychiatrist after my dad passed away. And it felt like it was just a bit too much. And she kind of went through the list of, your father's been dying of cancer, living with cancer, but really struggling for the last 2 years. Your husband just lost his job and is suffering massive depression. You don't know if you're going to be able to afford to stay where you love to live. one of your kids has dyslexia and has been talking about smashing her head against a wall when she's 7. So that's not fun. You're trying to find her the support. Your other kid also needs you. Finances are tricky because Geneva is one of the most expensive places in the world to live. Like, it's a lot, right? But it wasn't, in my mind, it wasn't enough to justify that I wasn't performing at top speed and levels. And what I realized when I created the Centered Mama Project, what I wanted was to make sure that no other mama ever felt alone. And I still talk about that. But what I was kind of dancing around was this idea that loneliness kills. People who live alone when they're older die earlier. People who are isolated from others get chronic and fatal diseases more often. Like, it's not something that should be associated with somehow being a failure socially or being a loser or any of the other things that we have an inner dialogue around loneliness. But I got really, really isolated and really, really lonely in that time, and decided that I wanted to reach out online because I could do that safely. I didn't have to eat with people, and I could stay in my house and eat my boiled carrots and rice and chicken, but still hopefully help other people because I knew I wasn't alone. And I realized quickly that there were women in the international scene, anyway, in Geneva, who were dying. Like, I remember hearing different stories of marriages dissolving because they just couldn't anymore. Women running away from their families because it was so much pressure they couldn't handle it. Getting chronically ill. Some committing suicide. I mean, it was a lot of really hard, heavy stuff that I didn't feel equipped to handle because I'm not a psychologist or a therapist. But I did feel really pulled to do something, and that's something I wasn't quite clear on what it was exactly. Until I started running events. So I run something called the MamaFuel mini break, and it's the idea of having a whole retreat and condensing it into 4 hours on the basis that you might not be able to get away for a full day. You might not be able to get away for a weekend, forget a week in Bali. Yeah. But you can probably, if you get organized, drop your kids at a friend's or at creche or at school, meet me by 10 o'clock, have some meditation, have some light yoga, have an amazing meal, have some great real conversation, do stuff to fill up your own love cup, and then go back into your life in time to pick up your kids and do the things. And nobody really needs to know you were gone, other than they'll see that the mummy they're seeing at the end of the day isn't the same as she was in the morning. And more importantly, you feel better. And in doing that, I started to realize just how much of a craving there is amongst mothers to be real with each other, because we're connected through social media, but it isolates us. And I know, you and I have had this conversation many times. I'm down here in my basement hideaway and it's fabulous, but actually I spend most of my day at home and I see very few people, and it's doing my nut in. And I can feel that. I can feel that I'm getting close to I can't do this anymore. And it's not MamaFuel I can't do anymore. It's the inverse. It's MamaFuel's hitting the road. I've got to get out there and meet people. And I've been doing that a little bit more recently. And it's made a difference. And so all of my anxiety and all of my self-doubt comes out just like it does with anybody else. It might not sound that way to people who are listening. And I'm grateful to every single person. We're nearing 5,000 downloads of the podcast. And we've crested 4,000. So I'm aiming for the 5. And I'd love to get to 10 by the end of this year, because these conversations need to happen. And I had a message this morning from someone saying, I don't even know what I'm looking for. I'm really struggling to manage my business and my life and my fitness and my family. And you know what? I just spent a lot of time alone, and it really blows. And I don't even know what I want from you, but I just appreciate that you responded. And there are so many women like that out there,
Can I go back over something? Because you've told me part of this story before. There's new stuff here. And there's something that really stayed with me when you told me the story of being in Texas and eating something that gave you this anaphylactic shock, where you said later on someone said to you, and I can't remember what kind of, whether it was a medical profession person or whoever it was, that if you had been fully resourced and healthy and well, it probably would just have been, running to the loo a few times, just normal food poisoning. But the fact that you were so run down, and I think this is so important, because it is so incredibly easy for us mothers to go, well, it's selfish to look after me, and the kids need me, and this person needs me, and I need to be there for my husband, my business, my kids, my work, my mother, my, whatever, whoever it is, I need to be there for the baking sale. And the fact that, that really stayed with me, how important that is, that actually it isn't selfish. It might save your life, and it might be the only way you can actually stick around, that because you were so depleted, this almost killed you. And if you'd looked after yourself, you might just have had 24 hours of just food poisoning.
Yeah. So at the time that I had this anaphylactic reaction, we were building our house. I was building our house. My husband was traveling. He was about to lose his job and was terrified because he put 30 years into this company and was just holding on by the skin of his teeth to get to his pension, which was only 6 years away. And it was a big ass pension. It was 80% of final salary plus bonus. I mean, we were set once he hit that age, except he didn't. He's hit the age, but not with the pension, because he was reorganized out of a job after 30 years by a bunch of very unpleasant forces and for reasons that made no actual objective sense. But that's what happened. So we knew that was, we had the sense that was coming. So there's a lot of fear in our house. We're building this new house. I'm building the new house. I have a kid who's clearly struggling at school. I'm looking into public schools to see if that's an option for her. I'm teaching yoga in a studio. I'm teaching private lessons. I'm going to corporates as well. I miss a corporate class. I just don't show up one day. I've never done that in my life. I just didn't go. I just didn't go to class because I forgot that I had class that day. That never happened to me. So there were red flags everywhere that I wasn't okay. I wasn't sleeping enough. My practice was dissolving because I didn't have time and blah, 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 blah. And I literally felt like I had a sword against my neck all the time. And what the terrifying allergist said to me was, you're probably allergic to something. I have a patient who's developed a late in life allergy to tomatoes, and this is probably you. And I'm going to present you to this medical meeting, and eat this tomato. But before you do, I want you to sign a release form saying that if you die, it wasn't my fault, and you agree to the risk that you're taking. And so she's trying to shove me full of like IV needles, and they try in 4 places and my body's not collaborating, and she gets angry at me and shouts at me because I didn't drink enough water. And so why are my veins collapsing? I mean, just a nightmare. So eventually in my fragile state went to find another doctor, which we tend not to do, right? We're like, oh, but I can't because she's my doctor, and what if she gets upset? And yes. And eventually I found a different doctor. And when I went to see him, he was like, yeah, you probably just had scromboid syndrome, which is something that happens with contaminated fish. Hundreds of compatriots of yours in the south of France get scromboid syndrome and fill the hospital waiting rooms every summer because, those tuna baps, the tuna sandwiches that you see in the windows, when you go to a sandwich shop, well, those get in the sun and the tuna is contaminated and away you go. And he said, he said, were you stressed? And I was like, Yes, I was very stressed. And he said, well, you know what? If you hadn't been under so much stress, if your body had bandwidth for any kind of stress, be it physical, emotional, mental, or otherwise, or nutritional, you probably would have just had a stomachache. As it is, you went into anaphylactic shock because your body is on constant alert all the time. And this was nearly fatal. Like, are you managing your stress better now? And I was like, no, not really. Our house was built. We'd moved in. I had done a flight to Canada. I had done the things, I'd survived all of these things, but I was very much a recluse at that point. And I was like, no. And he said, okay, well, I don't think you're allergic to tomatoes. So I'm just going to give you a tomato. Bring in some tomatoes that are like the ones that you ate. And I was like, okay. So I came in with tomatoes, and he was like, you know what? I'm not even going to set you on a table. You don't need an IV. I'm going to sit. Do you want to just sit here on the couch with your husband? And I said, okay. We brought paperwork. We started looking at different health insurance policies and choosing our different whatever. We literally spent an hour looking at health insurance policies, and he fed me like tiny pieces of tomatoes. He's like, eat this piece. I'll see you in 10 minutes. And he didn't even come back and check on me. He was so not worried about me that, like, whereas the other person had 3 nurses around me and was poking me full of holes and having me sign death certificates before I was dead and saying it's not her fault. So the context and the care was so different. And also this nugget of, had you been taking kinder care, you would not have been in this situation, possibly. And so that's something that I really take forward when I see mamas who are in high levels of agitation. And I'm in a group on Facebook of international moms living in Switzerland. And I see this over and over and over again. And what has made me talk about the mental health piece more recently is that May was Mental Health Month. It is every year. And there is actually a week dedicated to maternal mental health. I didn't know that until it popped up on Instagram. And I felt buoyed by the fact that there was a week dedicated to maternal mental health, and really, really pissed off because somehow there is this belief that we should just because we can make babies, that we should just know how to handle all of it. Mm-hmm. And we don't. We don't know enough about what mental health challenges we might face. We certainly see all of the like Hallmark card, Pampers ads, like little pseudo newborn babies who are really 6 months old. Like there are no pictures of what a newborn baby looks like and how terrifying it can be to have one of those little fragile beings placed on you. Like nobody, if you don't have a big family or friends or neighbors who've had newborns around you, you have no clue. And the mental health piece is so present for me in my own life. Like I had a big mental health wobble before Christmas, and I realized it was because all of my vitamins and mineral levels were off, and I was deeply anemic, and different other supplements were missing. And what do you know? I filled up my supplement tanks, and suddenly I felt better again. I thought feeling that shitty was just how I felt now. But I didn't know because it had been so progressive. And that's despite having had panic attacks and known about it, despite having gone to see a psychiatrist for almost 2 years, every single week to heal some of the stuff that I'd been carrying, despite having read every freaking, I mean, if I valued myself in the weight and number of self-help books that I own and have read, I would be a gajillionaire. Despite all of those things, I didn't know, again, that I was having a mental health wobble until I was through the other side and feeling better again. So that the fact that Maternal Mental Health Week was a few weeks ago really fired me up and spurred me to come out of what I can hide behind, which is the podcast. Like I can do this podcast and then not actually offer for anybody to work with me. I can do this podcast and not have to leave my house. But I want to leave my house, and I do leave my house more and more and more and more. I want to go work in a co-working space, and I'm going to be running events across Switzerland and in North America this summer. Like I'm so happy at events. I go to events. You and I have met in person at events. Like I love it. I thrive on it. And yet it's easy to hide, especially with social media. So we have this weird pseudo connection through social media, which is in fact just a breeding ground for comparison and judgment, usually to oneself and often to the others. And in that context, it is absolutely urgent and essential to me that we change the way, and this is my rallying cry for MamaFuel, to change the way that we treat ourselves first. Because if I had treated myself better, I wouldn't have ended up in ICU. I wouldn't have ended up on the verge of intubation. I wouldn't have ended up hiding for 3 years, more or less, in my house. Like I could just about manage home, school, grocery store, home. That was it. I couldn't, more than that was terrifying. And my heart would start to palpitate and my bowels would start to get all watery and my legs would turn into spaghetti. And there were times when I had to ask my neighbors to come and put my kids to bed because I was in such a state I couldn't actually put my babies to bed. So there was a lot of fear in the house, despite me being like rock solid, super capable, hyperachieving, type A, like strong person, and also human and frail and fragile. Mm-hmm. And nobody ever talked. I mean, now there is more talk about it, but there's not enough. And the other piece is there's like talking about it is one thing. It's a huge first step. Saying I'm not okay and asking for help is a huge first step, but it's not enough. We need to actually meet each other. We need to do things. We need to force ourselves out of our comfort zones. And I hate the word force. And I also hate the word hate. I'm listening to myself. Nudge ourselves beyond what we're maybe currently comfortable with to find the goodness that's on the outside of that comfort zone. And that's why I want to create these events in all of the places that I'll be in the next, between now and December, because there's such a demand. I can hear the outcry over and over in all of the groups of women that I'm in from mothers saying, holy shit, this is a lot. Mm-hmm. Or this isn't what I signed up for. Or my kid's being an asshole this week and I don't appreciate it. Or, you know, this is like, how did I turn into this person? This isn't the person I wanted to be. Where did my life go? I used to love to dance. Why do I never dance anymore? Or if I ask them, what do you love to do for fun? And they just burst into tears. I mean, that says something about our experience as mothers and about the shame that is hooked into anything that's other than that Hallmark Cardi Pampers advert version of motherhood where everything is fine and nurturing and loving and isn't it great, and let's go to the park and everyone's clean and the kids like each other. I mean, really?
I want to ask, because you've clearly learned something about what you need to fuel yourself and to look after you. And so I want to ask the question about what you do for your Mama Fuel. But before we get to that, I'm just wondering if there's a mama out there listening, like the one you heard from today, who doesn't even know where to begin. So obviously, if she can join you in Switzerland or in Canada for one of these Mama mini breaks, and if they're listening in real time, they can do that. But if they're not listening in real time, or if for whatever reason that's not possible for them, do you have a piece of advice for, like, how can they start doing something for them? Like, what's a good way to start?
I recorded an interview, if you're listening to this after the end of July 2019, with a lady named Lindsay Bong, who's a friend of mine and who's a therapist. And we were talking about how important it is to take up space. And taking up space looks like asking for help. Taking up space looks like saying, this is too much. Taking up space looks like admitting that you're not having fun. You're not enjoying this. Taking up space looks like getting a babysitter or a neighbor or a friend to look after your kids for 3 hours and doing nothing except what you feel like for 3 hours. Taking up space looks like going back to work if you're not loving being a stay-at-home mom. Taking up space looks like staying home if you decide you don't want to go back to work. It's allowing yourself to have needs and wants, and it's allowing and forgiving yourself for not loving it all of the time. It doesn't mean you love your children any less, but it means that you are actively loving yourself more. So it's easy to talk about, learn how to set boundaries and say no. And those are all super essential components, but the very first step is recognizing in yourself that you're not okay, and then carefully choosing somebody to say that to. And with the caveat that it can be crushing to say to someone that you're not okay, and have them, as I did a number of times with a friend that weirdly I'm not that much in touch with anymore. I would tell her I wasn't okay, and she would just give me all the solutions. She would just tell me how to fix it. And she would tell me to have a cup of tea, and, oh, you'll be all right. And, oh, it's not so bad. And it was really bruising to be going as someone who tends to not share that openly with people. Like with you, you're a dear friend and we've known each other for years, and I share with you openly, but I don't see you every day, right? And so the risk in a way is lower. So it was very bruising to not be able to have that conversation with a dear friend, a neighbor actually, who I would see every single day I would see. And so I would say to that mama, if you can find somebody to whom you can practice saying, I don't need you to fix this. I don't need any suggestions, advice, or solutions. Can you just listen to me? Can you just listen to me? And then lay it all out. And then do it again. Find people who are safe and do it again. And whether that's your sister back home across the ocean, or your old neighbor, or a primary school friend, or an old teacher, or a therapist. And trust yourself. If you go see a therapist, if you make the effort and you go see a therapist and it just doesn't jive, find another one. Because I think that speaking to the person who isn't the right fit for what you need is almost as damaging as not speaking at all, because it's just confirming your conviction that you don't deserve to take up space, that there's something wrong with you if you're struggling. And there isn't. There's nothing wrong with you. Nothing.
Yeah, it's so important to listen to your own intuition and to say, does it feel good telling this person? And if it doesn't, close. And whether you're paying them or not, you can find another person. Sometimes a stranger. Sometimes people feel more comfortable talking to a stranger because, like you said, you won't have to see them the next day, and they might tell other people also what what they know about you now. So yeah, I think anyone, but it's that trusting yourself that you can know if this conversation doesn't feel comfortable, I can close it and I don't have to keep having it. But to keep trying, like you said, until you find someone, and then hopefully many, many people that you can have that place where you can really be listened to.
Yeah, and then as a second step to that is giving yourself permission to take up space, like take up money from the family budget for things that nourish you and only you. Take up time from that you could be with your kids or your husband, or fulfilling your PTA responsibilities that you loaded on yourself in addition to all the other things because you had no spare time. Take time eliminate the word just. Take time purely for you. And the more you practice in non-dangerous ways, taking space for yourself, the more you practice and learn that it's not like the world isn't going to end and you're not going to die, and neither are your kids if you make and protect space and time and money for yourself, the more you will remember who you are. And something else that Lindsay said in our conversation, she said that she tries to do things in that time that she protects for herself. She fills it with the things that make her feel the most herself. And I just really love that idea of what could you do that make you feel the most you? So for me, I'd be reading a book. I'd be lying on the hammock outside, listening to the birds. I'd be hanging out in a pasture with horses. I would be hiking in the mountains. I would be singing my guts out to some song that I love and is in the right vocal range for me. I would be meeting a dear friend for coffee. Those are the things that dancing. I would be dancing. I'd be salsa dancing. Those are things that make me feel the most me, irrespective of my children and my husband and my situation or whatever. No matter what else, those things are still true from when I was 10 and 30 and 40. They're still true now. And so filling that time that you finally can protect for yourself and savor doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be far. It doesn't have to be like bells and whistly so that you can tell other people about it. Just the things that make you feel the most you. And that is such a precious gift to give to yourself, because then you start to trust yourself that you'll take care of and create space for yourself. And then you start a whole new pattern of honoring yourself and putting yourself in the mix. So it's not just what do my kids need? What does my spouse need? What does my boss need? What do my neighbors need? What does the PTA need? What do my parents need? It's them and me. Okay, you guys want to go have a play date at the park? That's cool. I'm happy to take you there. And I need this. I need 15 minutes on the sofa, uninterrupted, having my cup of tea and reading my book. Can you do that? Let's set a timer, uninterrupted. And then you practice and you get your 15 minutes. And if it doesn't work, you start again. Little tiny practices that put you back into the picture. It's why the whole business was called the Centered Mama Project at the beginning, was to put moms in the center of our own lives, because we get pushed out to the periphery and it doesn't work.
And so you've shared several things now that makes you feel like you, and that are ways that people can start. And is this how you get your Mama Fuel, or is there another favorite practice of yours that you want to share about how you get your Mama Fuel?
Well, it's interesting because this is my favorite question to ask everybody at the end. And in fact, I had an idea yesterday of a collaboration I might do with someone. So keep your eyes peeled when we get to episode 100, or your ears peeled. But as I reflected on this, I find that I often stop myself from doing the things that give me the most fuel. So yoga gives me loads of fuel. Going to bed early and feeling rested gives me loads of fuel. Going outside, being in nature, oh my God, by the water. Being with friends gives me so much fuel. Snuggling with my kids and reading them stories gives me so much fuel. Cuddling with my dog gives me so much fuel. And often, my brain steps in and goes, we've got stuff that hasn't gotten done yet. We still need to, write that post or respond to that person or plan that event, or no. Hang hang on just a second. And so it's a constant practice for me. And it's really important that anybody who's listening hear that. And I will say that anytime I'm in circle, both in the MamaFuel Sisterhood, which is my membership, or when I do the Mama's mini breaks, I will always say, like, I am creating and holding this space from within it. I'm not like on a podium, all holier than thou. I've got this figured out. You losers start like, no, oh my God, I am in the mud. And sometimes deeper and not so, more shallowly. But yeah, those are the things that fuel me so much and that I seldom give myself. Because my brain is a really hard taskmaster and wants to do really, really, really wants to do a lot of things and wants to be out there. I want to be on stage. In fact, I've never said this on the podcast. I want to be on stage having a conversation with Brene Brown about shame and motherhood. That's what I want to do. I want to get there. Partially, probably because my ego thinks that sounds fun, but more than anything, because I really, really, really want to shift the way that we treat ourselves and each other. And we've got to go through the shame conversation to shift that, because there's so much shame hooked into how we mother. So yeah, the brain drives against all of the MamaFuel-y things. But like today, just before our podcast, we could have had our podcast earlier. And I said no, in part because I went and sat in the hammock in the sun and ate lunch and played with my dog. And it was 10 minutes and it was enough, it just felt really glorious.
So even though sometimes you don't manage to do what fuels you, you know what fuels you. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like sometimes you do manage to do it and to keep it sacred, and that you have to remind yourself every day. It's not like you've got it down and figured it out, but it's a constant practicing and reminding and going, it's okay. And it is important. And this does matter. And I matter.
Yeah. And 10 minutes of yoga is better, in the clothes I'm wearing right now, than 2 hours of yoga in my special outfit with the right music and the lighting and the wind blowing in the right direction and the sun at the special angle. It's adapting it to, rather than the fantasy of what you think things should look like, is how can I and me, how can I add and me into this? All of this is going on. And what about me? How much more does your body need to call out to you before you paid attention? And so yesterday was a 10-minute yoga session where I had my mat. I just dropped it at the bottom of the stairs. We have a big house, and I just put my mat at the bottom of the stairs in the hallway because that's where it was, and did 10 minutes of yoga with the dog walking on my mat and making it dirty. And, I didn't change. I just went as I was. And I swear to you, those 10 minutes were better than not.
Well, I love this, because I think this is a philosophy through everything you've created, the Mama's mini break and the self-love love-a-thon, which is also, mini daily challenges. And so this bit of fitting it in, depending on how old your kids are and whatever your life looks like and what your resources are and what your schedule is, there's always space to make that something for you happen. And I love the way you make that accessible, and you talk about it and you put it out there so that we can all do more for ourselves as mamas.
Thank you.
And thank you for letting me interview you. I feel like we could have talked for another few hours, but I think this is...
It's been really fun. Thank you. I was a little bit, very excited to do this with you, but also, it's a bit funny being on the other side, and you don't, instantly having the voices going, oh God, did I ramble? Oh, is this interesting? The self-edits that we all do, right? We all do that all the time. Smart, creative, capable women, we do this to ourselves. And no, our stories need telling. In fact, in closing, I'm reading right now Dr. Tara Trent's book, The Awakened Woman. Oh my God, go and get it. She tells the story of how she wrote her dream of becoming educated after having had, I think she'd had 5 children by then, with a grade 9 education. And she now has a PhD, maybe 2 PhDs, and she lives in the US and is she's changing the lives of the women and girls back in her village, and even more broadly. And it's such a great reading and expression of how important it is to tell our stories. So thank you for helping me tell my story in a different way, in new and more revealing ways than I've shared. So if you're in my family and you're hearing stuff for the first time, I guess we have stuff to talk about. Or not. But yeah, it's been lovely. Thank you. Oh, that was so much fun. We could have gone on for hours, and Noomi and I have gone on for hours offline. It was so exciting to have that conversation with Noomi. And although I know that I went on at some length talking about my birth story and what preceded it, I just know the value of story. And I hear from women every day who are struggling for one reason or another. And it matters a lot to me, really a lot, that you know that you're not alone. Because however somebody else might look on the outside, you have no idea what's going on their insides. And that idea of never comparing your outsides to someone else's, your insides to someone else's outsides, got to get that right. Don't compare your insides to someone else's outsides. You never know what that person has lived and has gone through or is going through in that moment. And if you're struggling in any way, please reach out. You can reach out to me directly. You can come into our community, the MamaFuel Virtual Village, which is a free Facebook community. You can get in touch with me via Anne, A-N-N-E, at mamafuel.me, and I would love to hear from you and offer you any support that I can. If you liked this episode, please rate and review. That would be awesome. A great present for me at 50 episodes. And if you'd like to meet in person, oh my goodness, I am going to be starting a MamaFuel Mini Mama Break tour. I am going to be doing one on the 22nd of June in Geneva, one on the 13th of July in Geneva, one in Ottawa, one in Montreal, one in Kingston, at least one in the Toronto area, possibly one in Portland over the course of July and August. So if you're in any of those places or close to any of those places, get in touch with me. I want to meet you. I want to see you in person, and I want to give you love and hold some space for you so that you can step back into your life feeling more nurtured and nourished and seen and valued, because you're so amazing, no matter how broken you might feel or no matter how much you might be struggling and what you might be struggling with in any given moment. You are not alone. Come into the MamaFuel Mini Mama Breaks with me, and I will show you that. I will prove it to you one hug at a time. The best way of finding out where I am and when is to go to mamafuel.me/events, and you can sign up or invite me to wherever you are. And if I can make it, I would love to go and find you and 8 to 10 of your closest friends, neighbors, relatives who might be willing to do a Mama's Mini Break with you. It makes a great birthday gift, a great bridal shower gift, a great pre or post baby gift. It's just so good to spend 4 or 5 hours together in the company of other amazing women. And I would love, love, love to have the honor of facilitating that for you. So make sure that you go to mamafuel.me/events or email me at Anne, A-N-N-E, at mamafuel.me, and we'll see if I can come to where you are. Lots of love and talk to you soon. Bye for now. That's it for this episode of MamaFuel, the podcast. Thanks for listening. There's a lot more conversation, sharing, and real mama talk happening in our private Facebook group. To join the virtual village, go to www.mamafuel.me/Facebook. That's MAMAFUEL.me/Facebook. And be sure to say hi when you get there. If you like this episode, or if you know a mama who could use a little mama fuel, and let's face it, we all have times when we're running on fumes, I'd love you to share this episode and to rate it and leave a review. The algorithms work that way. The more reviews there are and the more sharing there is, the more mamas will be able to feel encouraged and supported with the conversations that you just listened to in MamaFuel. Every comment helps, and it's always a super delight to hear from you. Thanks, and bye for now.